All right, welcome back to Paladin Financial Talk. I'm Nikki Foley with our co-host, Mr. Tony Shore. Today's topic is one that many Minnesota families at some point may face. And I look at you, Tony, because I know that you're going through this right now, and we're going to come back to that. But how do you pay for long-term care like assisted living or memory care, or that nursing home facility? And what is going to be some of the key things that you need to plan ahead for? And we've spent this whole month talking about this up to this point. I've had a couple of guests joining us, and we talked a little bit about just what home care could look like without medical needs. And then last week we had a guest that was on with us that was talking specifically about assisted living and a memory care community that she oversees. And we are also planning to have another guest that is an attorney here in town that focuses on elder law. And he couldn't join us this week, but he will be with us in future weeks. But Tony, it just so happened that I walked by and you are going through a lot of this right now. Do you mind sharing just a little bit about your story and what you're going through as a child of two parents that are in assisted living and kind of transitioning into memory care as well?
Yeah, I can. And it's tough because both my parents have Parkinson's. And my mom is in much more of a late stage. She's had it a long time, years and years, and it was manageable for quite a while. You know, we see Michael J. Fox, who managed his for a long time, but you'll turn a corner and everybody's situation with this disease is different. And then, her legs no longer work and her arms and hands don't work so well. Muscle control, you lose that. So she's been in long-term care 3 years, and my dad's been in assisted living the last year and a half or 2 years, but now he's transitioning into long-term care. And Nikki, the problem here is I'm an only child, one of the problems. So I'm an only child and I'm 3.5 hours away, but there's a great facility there that they like and they want to stay in that area. So it's tough. It's tough in general, even if they're right across town or in the same town. It's going to be hard. So for our listeners and viewers out there, I think it's important to note how expensive it is, and it's very expensive. My mother's care right now is $11,000 a month.
Wow.
Yeah, and I know it ranges from for full-time nursing care is between $6,000 and $12,000 a month.
It's just incredible to think that that's something that you have two parents going through that. So that's an expensive endeavor that you have, not to mention any of the emotional time that goes into this.
Oh, that's
the logistics.
Yeah. And I mean, I can sit here and, I don't mean for people to feel sorry for me, although the only child thing throws a wrench in it. It's the first time in my life, Nikki, where I wished I had 3 sisters.
Absolutely.
And I do mean sisters. And not to be sexist, but people I know who have parents that have gone through this or grandparents. If I had 3 sisters, I probably wouldn't have to worry a whole lot about it because at least one of them would be there and more detail oriented. And but I think I'm handling it well. It is it's tiring and wearing. Just it's hard to see your parents age in the first place, but dealing with the Medicare options for them, right? Yeah. And Medicare does not cover the cost of long-term care. So when my mom went in, they didn't have anything. They didn't say, they didn't have a Jeff and Nikki Foley. They didn't have a Paladin Financial team that they worked with. They should have, but they didn't. And so they didn't have a lot, and they didn't really even own a lot of property. My grandfather owned the farm that I grew up on and that they lived on. But now they've inherited that farm. So she got Medicaid and it wasn't a problem. It covered all but about $1,000, and her Social Security covered the rest, right? And my dad's been in assisted living, which is $3,500, $4,000 a month. And his Social Security and the rent checks that he now gets from the farm in the houses there, that covers that, no problem. But now the problem is how do we cover the long-term care? Because that's a huge step up from $3,500 or $3,700 where it's at now. It's going to be $10,000, right?
When you said $3,500, I was like, that sounds like a bargain. I mean, how horrible to say that.
It's in a small town, and that was for assisted living. That is a really good deal. He has an apartment there. They know him. They're kind of giving him a deal because my mom is in their long-term care facility. It's the same company, but he's in the assisted living apartments area, and she's a couple hallways and locked doors away in the full-time care unit. And so they could see each other, which is good. But now he's going to be over there, but paying for it is the trick. And that is the problem that people are going to run into, because it's a real crisis in this country, the cost of long-term care.
It absolutely is. And so often as we plan today, people want to stay at home and they want to age in place.
Yeah.
And
my wife and I would like to age in place when we get to that point.
Yeah. And the answer is, family will hopefully be there. And I think about you, Tony, I know what you're going through, and, feel like every time I talk to you, there's more to your story and things have changed a little bit. But I think about how much is on your shoulders today, even when they are in a facility. And so think if that wasn't your scenario and you were trying to be a full-time caregiver, it's really not realistic for a working family to have that expectation.
It isn't. And we've even, we offered early on to move my mom and dad up or into our place, or look for a place that had a place where they could live. And it just didn't work out. They didn't want to do it. We couldn't find or afford the right place. Our setup currently isn't great. And my wife and I, as you know, we're both career professionals, and we have to put a lot of time into our jobs and our own 3 kids, and the cats and the dog. I'll throw them in there as well. It's hard to have nice things with pets and children.
Of course.
You know that.
Absolutely. Know that.
But you know what? On one hand, I don't mind, because my parents did so much for me growing up, and even in my 20s, they gave so much of themselves for me.
Yeah.
And so, now the tables have turned, and that's fine. That's my responsibility. So I don't have a problem with it there, but it is very taxing and trying. The distance for us is a problem. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I've been having to go down there every weekend, but if you work all week and you drive down there and help them every weekend, you can burn out pretty quick.
Yeah, you absolutely
doing
can.
that. And so you have to have solutions, and paying for it is one of the worst. And like, he inherited this farm, but that farm's been in the family since it was homesteaded in 1856, I think it was, in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. So my grandpa grew up there, my dad grew up there, I grew up there, and now we'll probably have to sell it because there's no other way to pay for his care. And my grandfather did not set it up properly. There should have been a trust. And I came in and tried to get them to set it up and helped a little bit. We might be able to. There's a chance we can hang on to it, but probably not.
Yeah. Your story brings to life the conversations that you hear, on paper or what's being said. But the reality so often is it doesn't touch you in a way that makes you make a different decision. And so I think it was meant to be that I passed you. We weren't planning on doing this show today. I was going to have a guest
like
today.
10 minutes ago, you said, hey, let's do the show again together today because my guest canceled. So,
But your heart right now, I think about, yesterday you said you had 6 calls from the
facility.
Yeah, from the facility, and probably another 6 today. And you just think about how taxing that is. Not that you don't want to be doing it, not that you're willing, but it's just, you have a full-time job and you have life that is also happening alongside of you. And so your story is one that I think about you a lot when I talk about this. And I know that that this is kind of a passion project for me, that I think everybody should have planning that goes in this area.
You gotta. And that I can't wait to hear the episode and talk to that elder care attorney, because that's what's so important, to plan that. If you have that piece in place, like I think of my grandfather, he lived to 101. So he was active, as you know, right up until he was driving still at 100.
Incredible.
And he just never stopped. He always had a purpose. He said, just never stop. That's the trick. And he did well, but he was from that generation where early 1900s, where he didn't talk about money, right?
Absolutely.
He had a will, and his wife, and eventually toward the end, one executor, one of the 4 kids knew about it. No other communication with anyone.
Yeah, it really is something that for many generations, conversations were not had about money. Conversations weren't had about the planning for end of life. And so turning that corner and making sure that you really do put a focus on communication. Communication's a big piece of this.
And nobody wants to talk about it, but you gotta.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, I couldn't be more grateful that you started the episode with your story and you're willing to share that with me and with everybody along the way here. So that is exactly what we're talking about today. And the purpose of our conversation is when you have 3,500, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, whatever
11,000,
yeah.
my mom. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever that
per
number
month.
is.
Yeah.
And that is per month. I mean, that just seems hard to digest, especially when you're talking about two people now in that scenario.
Yep.
And so that savings runs out quickly and you're starting to make emotional decisions like the farm or whatever that might be to, our listener here. But so things like medical assistance come into play, and how might the state or the county come into this? So that's the point of our conversation today. So I want to go through some basics of what is medical assistance, but then bring in the conversation related to annuities and life insurance, which is often used for long-term care planning these days. The concept of long-term care insurance really is somewhat outdated. Now, there's still some policies out there, but it is a fight sometimes to get claims paid, to get your care paid. And so the industry has evolved, and we talk more about annuities and life insurance as it relates to long-term care planning. So first of all, medical assistance is what is Minnesota's Medicaid program. And sometimes that can be confusing because it just feels like a very generic term. Yeah. So if you hear the terminology medical assistance, it's a proper noun, and it is Minnesota's Medicaid program. And so just to be clear, this is a joint between state and federal programs that pay out medical costs for people with limited income and assets. And I'm going to make note of income and assets are two different categories that we have to pay attention to as it relates to this. And so for seniors, it's often the only way that makes long-term care affordable, or a portion of it. And so one thing that I think is also important, and we talked about this just right at the beginning, but Medicare does not pay for long-term care, like assisted living and nursing home type communities and facilities. And so That's where people get confused oftentimes. And that was the whole point of us having this series right before annual enrollment season with Medicare. Is what a great time to stop and look and understand what your Medicare covers and what it doesn't cover, because it does not cover assisted living, memory care, and the things that we're talking about today.
Yeah. The only thing Medicare covers that's even remotely close is rehabilitative care.
There you go.
So if you're going from a hospital and you've had knee surgery or something like that, some type of problem where you have to be in a wheelchair for a while, you're going to need some full-time care. You can't perform all the duties. So you have to go into a care facility, and it might be a nursing home, but it's temporary, and the assumption is you're going to get better. And if that's the case, then they'll cover up to 90, maybe 100 days. That's if you came from a hospital, if you have meet certain criteria. Yeah. It's very iffy that they'll even cover that. But they don't cover, like, when you get Parkinson's or a disease in from old age, you're not going to get out of that wheelchair ever again. They won't cover it.
Yeah. Tony, it's so good in the words that you're using to describe it, because it's oftentimes the terminology gets so confusing. You hear nursing care. Well, you think that's broad. It's not broad. Yeah, it is very specific, like you described there.
Yeah.
So medical assistant, how might someone qualify for that? And I started with two words that I mentioned a moment ago. First, they're going to look at income, and there is a threshold that is you cannot be over that. And then they are going to look at assets. And so for a single person, that limit is $3,000. And so certain items don't count, like a home, if a spouse is going to continue to live there. That was what your situation was with your parent.
With my mom. Because my dad still lived at home.
Yeah. So he was able to
that
keep
residence.
That.
Yep.
Absolutely. One car, personal belongings, those don't count towards assets. But the key thing you need to know is income and assets. There's thresholds for both of those. The other piece, clearly we're talking about Minnesota here and medical assistance. And so you have to live in Minnesota with the things that we're covering today on the show, and then be a U.S. citizen or qualifying immigrant. So a few key things that are important to know the distinctions between. And then it comes into play of all the different variables of if I have some assets, but I don't have enough. And that's where it gets really gray. And that's somewhat what you're
How am I going to cover that? Right.
You got it.
Or how can I even plan ahead for that? And there are, there are financial products out there like hybrid insurance policies, life insurance policies, and certain types of annuities, because they can help. But also financial products might be treated as income or assets too, right?
There you go. And that is the key to what we want to cover today. And
Okay.
at least give some broad descriptions of things to consider related to this. And then when we do have that elder care attorney with us, that's where we get into the real specifics
Sure.
that actually make it come to life. So Tony described something there that I want to point out as well. So with medical assistance, that's usually going to be somebody that you may know ahead of time, I'm going to have to qualify for medical assistance because my assets are low, my income is low. Like that's the path I'm going to go. On the clear opposite end of that is somebody that can afford to pay this and have, self-pay basically throughout the entire time. But the reality is a lot of people don't fall on either end and they're right there in
somewhere
the middle.
in the middle. Yep.
You got it.
That's the problem. That's usually where the burden lies, is in the middle. Yeah.
And it's the people that have tried to really be planful in the sense of they have a bucket of assets set aside for retirement. It's just the fact that this is growing. Healthcare is growing at such an extreme rate for how much it costs on a monthly basis. And so products have been designed and they typically fall into two categories, annuities or life insurance. And they have what they call long-term care riders attached to them. And so they're planning for this scenario, the American population who probably cannot afford it on their own. And so figuring out ways that these products can help along the way. So let's just use the example of annuities. Let's tackle that one first. So when you have an annuity, you are often putting a bucket of money into the annuity, and then it continues to grow, or it waits until you annuitize it. And that means you turn on an income stream. And so let's talk about that. If it is an annuity that you have that cash value, that is going to count against that asset bucket. So if you have 100,000, clearly you're over that 3,000 threshold that they have put out there. So you're eliminated.
Right.
Once you turn that on for that stream of monthly income or those payments, guess what? That knocks you out from the income side of things because you are now over the income threshold.
Sure.
So, how does that work and how do we need to navigate that? That is where having a plan and potentially working with an elder law attorney to be very mindful of how you can navigate this. And so one of the things is, can it be irrevocable? Can it be equal payments and the beneficiary be the state? Well, that would be really difficult to navigate on your own. If you're putting a large chunk of money in an annuity and then you're like, oh, by the way, I'm going to leave the state as my beneficiary, that takes some very key planning. And I wouldn't want to navigate that alone. I don't know about you, Tony, if I was putting $100,000
No, none of
in
that. And I'm not doing any of this without, professional help from a professional financial services professional, estate planning or elder care attorney. And you guys have a great team at Paladin that can help with this. And I think that's great because like you said, I mean, and I have a question there. So you're talking about, like, let's say Jane has $100,000 in a deferred annuity, and it annuitizes and it pays $1,200 per month. She's getting $1,200 per month. So Jane, the MA or Medical Assistance Program in Minnesota, that's their Medicaid, they are going to count that as $1,200 a month income, not $100,000 in assets.
Got it.
Because it's been annuitized.
You got it.
But if you're not getting monthly payments out of that annuity, they look at the whole amount.
You got it. And that counts against the asset test.
Okay.
So you kind of in a catch-22 is, well, how am I supposed to navigate that? The good news is you can navigate it, but there's just parameters that I would highly encourage you bringing in an elder law attorney to make sure you know that it's set up correctly.
Because everybody's situation is different.
You got it.
Right?
Exactly. And so this is the broad concepts. Then you get into, how does that apply to me? The other piece that plays into this is you think about if you are potentially dependent on this bucket of money to pay, but you have a spouse at home. You still have to have all your normal living expenses. Things don't just get cut in half. And how is that spouse going to be treated along the way, especially if you have to spend down your assets to qualify for medical assistance? Well, you can't leave that spouse at home with nothing. And so the good news is it is in a situation where the spouse can maintain the home. They can keep the home. They can keep one car. They can keep personal belongings. And so again, you just need to know what are the key pieces, and then make sure you know what your roadblocks are and how to navigate that, and make sure you have a smart strategy and structured appropriately. The other product that comes into this, we've mentioned, is life insurance with an LTC rider. And so many people have policies with long-term care riders these days. It's just more of the path that people are taking. Once we figured out long-term care insurance may have some challenges in itself. And
and most of the companies, big companies that used to offer it won't even offer it anymore, because it wasn't cost effective for them either. And for the consumer, it wasn't great because the premiums were so high. And then if you, for some reason, ended up not using it, all that money you put in, really high premiums for years, gone.
You got it. I was talking with one of the guests that last week we were planning on having two guests here. Both of them had been executive directors at assisted living and memory care facilities, communities, and one of them couldn't be here, sick kiddo. Anyway, but she and I had a conversation ahead of time that she was talking about when certain names of carriers would come up, they would just cringe because they knew how hard it was going to be to get payment out of them, where other ones were much, much easier. And that was the whole thing that happened. Part of the thing that happened with these long-term care insurance companies, people were finding that they had to fight really hard to get something paid. And it just,
that's not the way it should work. And that's why what you're talking about, though, and what the more modern tool that people are using is life insurance with an LTC or long-term care rider. And that's also, I've heard people refer to it as a hybrid policy, and that works really well, right? I mean, there's different ways you can set it up where you can actually use the death benefit. If you don't need long-term care, the death benefit all goes to your loved ones or your beneficiaries. If you do need long-term care, you can tap into that death benefit while you're still alive to help pay for it. Is that right?
You got it. That's the exact concept. And sometimes they have what they call doublers on it. So they double your money if it is going to a long-term care facility. And so they really have evolved as our country needs care. Clearly, the insurance companies and the businesses are making sure that they are stepping up to what is the challenge of our world. And so they have gotten really good at some of these products. But let's apply that whole concept of medical assistance and income and assets back to this product as well. And we'll keep it high level because it may be unique to each individual. But life insurance, oftentimes people know term life insurance, and that really has no cash value. That's where you are paying for a death benefit. So for this situation, when you're applying the concept of assets or income, it doesn't count as an asset because it's not really yours. You're renting it for that death benefit.
For your loved ones. Yeah.
You got it. Now, whole or universal life that has a cash value, that is where it may come into impacting that asset threshold. And so if the face value is under $1,500, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's over that, which most cash value is going to be when you're looking at a life insurance policy, that's where we're starting to talk about specifics. So back to some of our examples. Let's say we have a $50,000 policy, 10,000 of it has cash value. Well, you're over that threshold. Therefore, you would not qualify for medical assistance, as an example. Now, here's where with those LTC riders, if they are paying the property directly, so the facility of the community that you're in, it doesn't count as income. And so again, it's all back to how this is structured and making sure that you're well educated to make sure that we don't do anything to ourselves that was unintentional, and we're structuring it in a way that's going to work towards or with medical assistance, in case that happens to be your scenario.
Right. And I want to point out another thing that I've learned in dealing with my mom and dad and having this situation where my dad has some farmland and property with houses on it out at the farm. After he passes, Minnesota can come and recover costs from my mom's cost or his cost from any remaining death benefit in the life insurance policies and from land. They can put a lien on property. So the state, even though that medical assistance can pay for it, if you have a spend down to that $3,000 or you run out of money or assets, the state can go after any assets that you've gotten unless, or even given away, you'll have to pay. They aren't going to pay your costs if right before you went in, 6 months before you went into long-term care, you gave away $300,000 or bought a $300,000 house for your kids. That's not going to work. And so I've been learning these things, and it's tough. And how can everybody know all of this? It's too much. You've got to have a team of professionals.
Yeah, you brought up a good point there, Tony, and that's probably the last thing that we can end on here. It is called the 5-year look back rule, and that is where you have to be so planful as you're doing this. Is sometimes you have to work years ahead to make sure that all the pieces fall in place. And as you are experiencing, it happens overnight that your dad may need to move from independent to assisted or assisted to memory, and you do not have time to be planful. And so working ahead is really the key to a lot of this.
And I tried, in my case, I tried to go to my grandpa and my dad, but neither one of them, to them, I'm still the grandkid and the child.
Yeah.
And even though I work in the industry, they didn't want to do that. I said, there's a 5-year look back. So if we do this now, if you set it up a certain way now, the state won't be able to touch it if my mom and dad go. But they didn't do it that way.
And that is a generational thing. It has nothing to do with you or any of our listeners.
And it's not that they're bad people. They just, and that's going to happen,
Absolutely.
So then you have to deal with it as it comes, like I'm doing right now.
Exactly. And so hopefully this episode has given some thought to medical assistance, how it might come into play. I can't wait till we have the elder care attorney with us. But I think the key is medical assistance may come into play for a much greater portion of our population than even people realize right now. Yeah. And so being planful, making sure that you know how it works in conjunction with annuities and life insurance, it all has to be handled carefully, I guess is the best way to say that. And with that, there's lots of resources out there, from the elder care attorney side of things to working with a financial advisor. And there's even free resources. So Senior Linkage Line is a line that's available to Minnesota residents at 800-333-2433. And so lots of opportunities to educate and have the right professionals around you. Tony, anything that you want to share before we wrap up? You've already done so much for this episode, and I'm very grateful for you. Anything, though you want to close on?
No, I just can't encourage people enough to not put it off, to plan out your legacy planning, your estate planning, and your long-term care planning, and work with professionals who deal with this on a daily basis. And, at Paladin Financial, you've assembled a great team. You have elder care attorneys you can recommend that you work alongside. You've got to have the financial aspect laid out as well. You don't want to leave your loved ones in a bind either. So work ahead. That 5-year look back, 2 out of every 3 people, almost 2 out of every 3 now will need some type of long-term care.
Isn't that an incredible statistic?
Yeah, and it's you can look that up almost anywhere. I think it's 73% of the population.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to fight that number, but at the same time, people want what they want. They want to stay home. And so oftentimes people don't take action. So hopefully a little bit of education, something that we learned from Tony today and all that he's going through. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Paladin Financial Talk. Loved having Tony with us today. It was great to hear his voice again. You can follow us on all the social media platforms as well as on YouTube, and listen to us on the podcast platforms. Contact us at 651-842-8406 or follow us on our website at paladinfinancial.com.
All right. Thanks, Nikki.